All righty, let's get started. We are going to go over some COVID-19, what we know now so far, and planning for the future. This will be a mixture of some old slides as well as new information about the race for a vaccine. My name is Dr. Valda Crowder. People affectionately know me as Dr. V. I'm an emergency medicine physician for 30 years. You can get the information that's on this slide at my website, which is AskDrV.us, and you can also follow me on Twitter. All right, the structure is going to be a slide presentation, usually 10 to 15 minutes long. Today will be a little bit longer because we've got a lot of vaccine information, and then followed by Q&A. During the presentation, everyone will be in listen mode. You ask a question using the chat icon or also the Q&A, and you can type it in. I take typed questions first, depending upon the number of people on the call. Then we may be able to actually open up live lines. The intention is to keep the webinar participants informed with COVID-19 science that will help you and your family stay healthy during this pandemic. The outcome is to leave the webinar motivated to create an action plan for yourself and your family, or you may adjust an existing action plan, or motivated to create an action plan or adjust an action plan for a broader community. There could be a homeowners association, an employment, a school, etc. All right, so I had a couple of questions last time, and I apologize on the last presentation. We got cut off doing Q&A because I actually, the power went out on my battery, but someone had asked me about the 4 pandemics. 11-year-old was on and asked about the 4 pandemics that I had actually treated patients across. So I wanted to go and add this slide back in, which is for people to remember what is a pandemic. So a pandemic is a new disease. It must be an infection and it must be contagious. It can be contagious by humans transmitting it, or it can be contagious because it's transmitted by animals. Think about primarily like a mosquito. And people in general do not have immunity to it. So examples of pandemics are smallpox, polio, tuberculosis, HIV, H5N1, SARS, which was similar to COVID-19, MERS, malaria, and Zika. So in addition to COVID-19, I've treated patients. HIV was called immunodeficiency disease of unknown origin when we did not know what it was. Tuberculosis, and also malaria. It took the country 99 days to reach the first 1 million cases, 43 days to hit the next 1 million case. 28 days we had reached the next 1 million cases and we're up to 3 million in July. And then 4 million just came 2 weeks later. The number had jumped to 5 million in 17 days. And we recently reached 6 million in about 22 days. So we're roughly averaging about 1 million cases in about anywhere from 17 to 22 days. We're now looking at, and someone had asked me about whether or not the COVID cases were underreported. And I often have said on this presentation that they have been, that you're gonna find, I'm sorry, somebody asked me whether or not the COVID cases were overreported. Like, are there really as many COVID cases? Are there really as many deaths as people are talking about? And as I said, we'll go back and studies will find that it's actually been underreported and that we're gonna find more COVID than we actually thought when we actually compare it to historical norms. So one study that was recently done, this was on a timeline from the CDC, actually found that COVID-19 may have been in the US as early as December. So this is something that's really important because when you have a really robust public health system, then a robust public health system actually catches these things earlier so that you can implement things earlier, take actions earlier, and you don't have to have as aggressive of a treatment plan as a shutdown. Just a reminder that Dr. Fauci actually warns that these 7 states should actually go on lockdown. North Dakota and South Dakota are particularly having very, very high increasing rates of COVID-19. Iowa, Arkansas, Missouri, Indiana, and Illinois. Now, this was very interesting. This actually came out today, and it was a study out of, I believe it was out of Yale, that showed that when we did the lockdown and everything that we've done around lockdowns and decreasing our exposure to people, that it has prevented 60 million coronavirus infections. Now, just so that everybody knows, that means that we have probably prevented 1 million people dying. These are people that we know, right? And so everybody that's on this webinar should be very proud of themselves and very proud of their families. I know sometimes it's very hard to do some of the things that we're doing, but this really is a life-saving measure. Now, how do you know if you have COVID-19? We kind of discussed this, but I'm going to run through it again. The diagnosis is really by PCR test, antigen test, or CAT scan. So the PCR test is a nasopharyngeal swab, and it's most accurate 8 days after exposure. It can be inaccurate if it's done too soon or too late. So 2 or 3 days after exposure versus 13 and 14 days after exposure, you could get a negative reading when you're really positive. The antigen test is what people call the rapid test. In the UK, they have a test that's as rapid as 20 seconds. Our test is maybe 10 minutes or 10, 20 minutes. That tells you it's negative when it's really positive about 20 to 30% of the time. So what we do in the hospital setting is we determine that someone's negative by doing 2 of these tests back to back. Now, if we have multiple negative tests and we really think that someone has coronavirus, then we will do a chest CT. And the chest CT will actually show ground glass opacifications and linear opacifications, which the yellow arrows sort of show in the middle diagram there that's on the bottom. And that actually is coronavirus until proven otherwise. So we all know to respect COVID-19 is highly contagious. It is way, way, way more contagious than the flu. You only need to be exposed to it for 45 seconds. If 100 people got exposed to coronavirus, 60 to 80% of them would actually become positive. The flu is more like 30%. So it's about 2 to 3 times more dangerous as far as infection than the flu. It is both droplet and airborne. So in a droplet format, that is the entire molecule, and then it does form micro droplets that can actually go in the air and act like airborne particles. And that is how come we had originally a recommendation to stay 3 feet and later to stay 6 feet or more away from other people. This diagram here shows droplets like Ebola versus airborne like measles. It's really important for people with asthma not to use their nebulizer if they live at home with other people. You cannot tell the difference between an asthma attack and a COVID-19 attack. So either you use your nebulizer outdoors, on a porch, in a garage with the garage door open, or you can use an inhaler with a spacer or aero chamber, such as is shown here. We have talked about the 6 clusters of COVID-19. These are the various clusters of symptoms. Cluster 1 through 3 are flu-like symptoms or GI symptoms. And those are the more self-limiting infections where someone does not have to be hospitalized. Cluster 4 through 6 are the more severe ones. They're usually associated with fatigue. They're associated with some confusion or a combination of respiratory and GI symptoms. And these are the patients that usually wind up getting hospitalized in the ICU or die as a result of COVID-19. All right, what to do if you just found out you're COVID-19 positive. So one thing is you want to quarantine immediately, preferably for 21 days. There's been about several studies where after 14 days, there's still a significant number of people that are positive. Other things that you might want to get or have around the house, just in case anybody in your home has to quarantine, is a pulse ox machine, which is $20 to $30 on Amazon. This basically measures your oxygenation level. And the reason for this is when you have COVID-19, you become short of breath and you don't know you're short of breath. So normally people, if they get short of breath, they know they're short of breath. With COVID-19, you don't. So it's important that you measure it. If anything's less than 95%, you go to the emergency department. And zinc and vitamin D3 is something that I would recommend for anybody during this time period. And the recommended dietary allowances are there. You also want to have a bathroom that's only going to be used by you. You want to have a cell phone. You want to have people leave food at your door, open the windows to the house, or have a HEPA filter if you're sharing a home with other people. All right, this is really important. The EPA actually, as of today, just approved 3 new disinfectants, ZEP, and ZEP is a brand that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. I've seen it more, I believe, at Home Depot, but you can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's. And these are the brands that actually kill COVID-19 within 60 seconds. So the EPA just approved these 3 brands. So if you feel like you don't have enough cleaning supplies at home, you can't find Lysol, these just got approved, and you can probably still get them on eBay, Amazon, or Home Depot or Lowe's. All right, I'm gonna go over quickly mask. The inventor of the N95 mask was Peter Tsai. Basically, the fabric on the outside of the mask is electrostatically charged such that it attracts particles like a magnet. And that actually greatly improves the efficiency of an N95 or KN95 mask. One is the American standard, one is the Chinese standard. But as far as their effectiveness, they're both the same. But the reason that the fabric on the outside is also important as to why you don't want to touch the outside of the mask. His recommendation is 7 masks, which is about a $35, $40 investment. You use one for each day of the week. After you use them, you hang them, you let them sit for a week before you come back to them again. And that week allows any virus that's on the mask to actually deactivate. Very important not to use a mask with a valve. The mask on the left has a valve. The mask on the right does not have a valve. The valve is used for an occupational setting where there might be construction or dust or debris. You don't want to breathe air in, but you're okay breathing air out. You do not want to use these sort of valve masks during the pandemic. The no valve masks to the right is the preferred one. This is an FDA registered N95 active ventilation mask with a HEPA filter that's clear, allows for people's smile to be seen. These are on back order. I've actually put my information in to actually get one of these when it comes out. I think we'll all feel a lot better when we can see each other smile. Neck gaiters. You see a lot of these neck gaiters when people are exercising. Please do not use these. These actually, I see these on joggers and bikers and things like this. This actually increases COVID-19 transmission. So you really do not want to use these sort of like tube-like material that goes up and down. A lot of people talk about COVID-19 deaths. I just want to talk really quickly about the long-term effects of COVID-19. 75% of the people coming out of the ICU have post-intensive care syndrome, and that's where they have a cognitive, mental, or physical impairment. It could be renal failure requiring dialysis or transplant, limb amputations, stroke, and then we have some people who are just reporting that they're fatigued, short of breath with normal activities like walking a block or house cleaning. 1/3 of the COVID-19 positive Big Ten athletes had myocarditis. Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle. That inflammation then makes it more difficult for the heart to pump. So we're seeing a lot of this in younger people. And so it is one of the side effects that we're actually seeing with the infection in folks that get it that are young. We had a lot of Pac-12 and Big Ten students that are catching COVID-19. This student here, a 20-year-old Jermaine Stevens, actually passed from COVID-19. They took a risk in letting their son go back to college and also playing football. I think it's really important. People actually really forget about obesity as a risk factor. So football players and things like that really should not be playing during this time period. When you look at COVID-19 deaths that are under 21 years old, 75% of them are minorities. I want to say that again. When you look at COVID-19 deaths that are less than 21 years old, 75% of them are either Black, Hispanic, or Indigenous, right? So there is really a toll on young people of minority descent. All right, so there's been a lot of talk about herd immunity, and I want to sort of go over what is herd immunity. So herd immunity is where a significant proportion of the population becomes immune to the infection, such that it's less likely for the infection to spread. There's two ways for people to get for herd immunity to occur. One is so many people get the infection, right? So if 70 to 90% of the people actually get infected, after they get infected, they have lifelong immunity, then you can possibly have herd immunity. Or the other way, which is the way that we're used to, is that people actually get immunized, right? So if you think about things like polio that we don't see traveling around our communities anymore, that is an example of herd immunity actually working by vaccine. So there's been a lot of talk around using a herd immunity strategy. This is not a particularly good strategy with this disease, and I'll sort of just go over why. So if you want 80% of the population to be infected, and you have 330 million people in the United States, that means that you need 264 million people to catch COVID-19. So currently we have 6 million COVID cases, and that's resulted in about 183,000 deaths. We're up to like 190,000 now. So if you had 264 million cases, then you would have 8 million people who died. Now that is, that is roughly, almost, let's see, 8 divided by 33. That's about 1 in 40. So that's quite a bit, and our hospital system really couldn't take that. Sweden attempted herd immunity, and they actually stopped because their healthcare systems got overwhelmed. Their citizens were complaining that their friends and family were dying unnecessarily, and they stopped their experiment using herd immunity to deal with COVID-19. The other reason why you can't get herd immunity from COVID-19 is because people get reinfected with it. So there's been studies now out of Europe and China where your antibodies to COVID-19 go down 3 to 6 months after you actually get the infection. So you also don't get lifelong immunity. So we've already had a case of a patient getting reinfected with COVID-19 in Nevada. So you'll never really get herd immunity if there's not really long-term antibodies formed after an infection. All right, so the vaccine, this is where all the action is at. So let's talk about this. I'm going to go over basically the different phases, which is exploratory, where they're actually looking at how does the infection work. Preclinical, where you test it in animals. Both of these were done, exploratory and preclinical, with coronavirus, with COVID-19 during the SARS pandemic. So SARS and COVID-19 are both coronaviruses. Then you have phase 1, which is a vaccine given to a small group of people to sort of assess safety. And then you also have phase 2, which is often hundreds of people. And then phase 3, right now the phase 3 trials are doing 30,000 patients, where you're testing both does it work and is it safe. Once you complete phase 3, then you get they review the data, there's approval, and then it goes to manufacturing. If manufacturing, you have to have quality control, and then after that, there is distribution. So that is basically the process for vaccines. So currently, as of today, this is the New York Times vaccine tracker, and this shows where are we. So we've got about 27 in phase 1, 14 in phase 2, 9 in phase 3, and then some in some sort of limited use are about 5. You'll see that when I show you the World Health Organization data, they have more vaccines in the pipeline than this. Now, there's been a lot of stuff about, do we really need phase 3? This is on my website. This is 22 cases where the phase 2 studies had very different results than the phase 3 trials. And it led to a very significant difference in how we handle things. And one of the times when we made a mistake was actually an early introduction of a polio vaccine that had lots of side effects. So it's important that all 3 of these phases are done. So COVID-19 pharmaceutical CEOs have vowed to wait to approval to finish phase 3. All of them have vowed that they are going to finish phase 3 before filing for approval. They also, the developers prepared a joint pledge of safety and standards where they agreed upon certain standards of safety before they roll out anything to the public. German biotech company, their BioNTech, believes that they will have a vaccine ready by December. There was one that we were looking at that it looked like it was particularly good, and that was AstraZeneca, and that was being done in conjunction with Oxford University in the UK. That study has been put on pause in Britain. In the US, I don't think we've put it on pause yet, but we're probably going to soon. There was a case of transverse myelitis, which is basically an infection of the spinal cord. The person did recover, but that was a significant side effect, and so that study has been put on pause. Now let's talk about what the World Health Organization is doing. They are working with scientists, businesses, and global health organizations through a mechanism called the Act Accelerator to speed up any response to any pandemic. When a safe and effective vaccine is found, an organization called COVAX will actually facilitate the equitable distribution of the vaccine to protect people in all countries, with people who are at most risk being prioritized. So what does this look like? So COVAX is made up of 3 organizations, CEPI, Gavi, and the World Health Organization. Now, these 3 organizations then work in collaboration. So let's go over kind of what they do. They said that they will provide dosages for 20% of any country's population. They will actively manage a diverse portfolio of vaccines, deliver the vaccines as soon as they're available, and assist to end the acute phase of the pandemic and help to rebuild economies. So when you actually look at how does this global alliance really work, there's a lot of organizations that are actually working together. The vaccine manufacturers, various countries, World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank, research agencies. So all of these agencies are really working together. Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, their mission is to save lives, reduce poverty, and protect the world against the threat of epidemics. Gavi has vaccinated more than 760 million children in the world's poorest countries, and Gavi has prevented 13 million deaths. CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, is similar, a partnership between public, private, philanthropic, and civil organizations to actually launch and to develop a vaccine to stop future epidemics. So when you look at the role of these organizations, there's not just discovery, but it's the development, the licensure, the manufacturing, the stockpiling, and then at the very end, sort of like the distribution. So even though they talk on the news a lot about Moderna and the vaccines that are being looked at in the United States, be clear there's a global effort that is going on regarding these vaccines. All right, so let's actually go over a little bit that is important here for what everyone should be doing just in their daily lives as far as getting back out into the world. So one is that it's important to really know your zone. There's basically 3 sorts of zones: green, yellow, and red. And this is all based upon what is the number of cases and the diagnostic test positivity rate, which is basically how many tests become positive when you do 100 tests. So some people also have a zone called an orange zone. In my calculation, the red and the orange zone are basically the same. So red and orange zone have the most infection, yellow has somewhat in between, and a green zone is a place where, you know, life can maybe come slightly back to normal as far as doing things, because it has the lowest rate of infection. Now, in any of these zones, I would not be going to a bar or going to a church or going to a concert of any sort, because those sorts of indoor activities like that are associated with a lot of spread, whether or not you're in any of these zones. But it does sort of impact whether or not you might sit outside and enjoy dinner at a restaurant outside, or might go to a backyard barbecue with 10 or fewer people, etc. These are all considerations for your kids going back to school as well. I don't recommend that kids go into any sort of indoor school if you're in an orange or red zone. The other things to consider around going back to school are the age of your children, and the condition of the people living in your home. I think one of the things that is most important is, we have to really remember the risk factors for this disease. And the one that people seem to forget is obesity. So if you have a child that is overweight, or even a minority child that seems to be more susceptible to, because as minorities, we seem to be more susceptible to dying of this less than 21 years old. You want to keep your kids out of school and stay home and be safe. We are now sort of, I believe, within a period of 6 to 8 months where we will actually see a vaccine to this. This is what the COVID Act Now website looks like. There's also a Johns Hopkins website, which is not really as color-coded, but has some of the similar data. When you actually click on a state, the state then breaks down into counties. So for instance, even though Texas is completely orange, when you click Texas open, it will not be. The different counties are all color-coded based upon where they are. So counties that other countries have done as far as school reopenings and getting back to life is, one, they've decreased their community infection rate substantially. When it comes to schools, they've done things like decrease class size, move the desks 6 feet apart, remove public water fountains, provided PPE for teachers, administrators, more frequently cleaned rooms, buses, temperature testing, etc. This is a COVID-19 risk chart that was put together by the Texas American Medical Association. This is actually on my on the website. If you ever want to look up what sort of things are riskier than others. And as you see, some of the things that I talked about, attending a religious service, going to a bar, attending a music or a sports stadium, those are things that are very high risk, right? As you come down the risk chart, you'll see things like getting takeout from a restaurant, playing tennis, playing golf, going for a walk or run. These are all things that are going to be lower on the risk chart. This came out from Dr. Fauci today, and it's not the news that we want to hear, but I think that it's really important that, at the end of the day, we have to kind of deal with the circumstances that we have. And there's a hankering to kind of go back to life as normal. And, this is a time now where a lot of people get tired of wearing a mask. They get tired of being indoors, particularly as the winter time comes. And it's really important to really keep things going because, we will see the distribution of this vaccine in January, February, March of next year. And we all want to be around to sort of get it and really be able to go back to life as normal and enjoy our families and loved ones. All right, Daryl, I'm glad you were on. I wanted to make sure I listed those pandemics so that way you knew what they are. A lot of people forget about HIV and tuberculosis and malaria and diseases like that. But those are also pandemics that we have dealt with in our lifetime. And for those people that are older on this call, they probably also remember polio, which I didn't. I've never had any experience with. But there's also Zika that has come out, and SARS and Ebola, etc. So yes, all right. I'm glad that you guys got back on to get the answer to that. And I'm sorry my power went out last time. All right, so go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. Okay. When this all started, okay, here's a question. Dr. V, when this all started, how valid was the hold your breath test? Oh, very good question. All right. So this was something that was going around, and it was like, if you can hold your breath for a certain period of time, then you don't have COVID-19. So that was completely unreliable. So they actually tested it. It had no bearing at all on whether or not you had COVID or not. But there was a lot of people talking about it, and there was a lot of people holding their breath and then convincing themselves that they didn't have COVID when it really didn't have anything to do with it. And you know, that's part of dealing with a pandemic, as you can see, a major part of dealing with a pandemic is communication, right? And specifically communication of scientific information, right? Because in general, it's almost, and we saw this even with HIV, right? There were people who had HIV and they were going to Mexico for these treatments that weren't tested. Now, AZT was in Mexico before it was here. So, and there was a whole movie about that. And so, you know, it did work for some people, but there's a lot of people that went down to Mexico for potions and notions and spent thousands of dollars on things that didn't work. And we see that sometimes even with cancer patients. So what happens sometimes is that, you know, we're very desperate to have either, you know, good information or information that we want to hear as opposed to the actual scientific information. So, alrighty, I've got a couple things in the chat here. Okay. Okay, alrighty. Alrighty, so a couple things that I'm being asked here. Okay, Dr. V, I'm working on developing a survey for the Black folks in other low income areas, public housing developments, etc. What types of things do we want to ask as an example? Okay, this is actually very good. So one thing that you really want to ask, and I would ask this in any sort of dwelling where you have multiple units in that dwelling, what type of filters are they using? And how frequently are they changing the filters? So that would be a question to the property managers. It's very important if you're in an environment where there are multiple units that you use a HEPA filter, and that HEPA filter is then changed regularly. I have also seen where if there's large housing units, that they're also testing the compressors, the blades on the compressors, to see if there's any COVID-19 in the building. If you wanted to ask things of certain people, I would ask them, do you have enough masks? Are you able to get masks easily? You know, do you know how to wear one properly? Do you know how to take it off? Do you know how to not take it off? I would also probably ask people things like how many times they're washing their hands in a day. Have they been exposed to anybody? What sort of things are they not doing, and what sort of things are they doing? What sort of questions do they have? I would also ask that. So those would be things that I would think would be important. Also, the other thing to ask people a lot of questions about is people need a lot of support around homeschooling. there's a lot of issues around people having to homeschool. I mean, most of us do not want to go back to, you know, ninth grade trigonometry, right? Or whatever it may happen to be. So there are a lot of issues around and a lot of support that's needed for people around homeschooling. All right, the other question was also deep breathing exercise. Do deep breathing exercise help with the prevention and recovery from COVID-19? So that's interesting. So not the prevention. No, it doesn't help with the prevention. The recovery, it's interesting. We're not really quite sure. However, they do have patients do this thing called a spirometer, which is where you basically blow out and you blow a little ball up, and you try to get the ball up higher and higher and higher. And it's used to try to increase your lung capacity once you've had significant lung damage from any sort of infection or pneumonia. So after people have had COVID-19, I have seen people actually use the spirometer at home. Great questions. All righty. Let's see, what do we have? Anybody else? Go ahead and type something in the Q&A or put it in the chat. All righty. I'll give you guys a little bit longer if somebody's up. There we go, something popped up. Okay. Okay, let me see here. Okie doke. All right. So someone is asking me about whether or not I have an opinion about a news article. And this is a news article specifically. I can't read the entire news article, but I'm just going to take a look at it quickly. Yeah. So okay. So I know there's been a lot of articles about vaccines and who's going to get them, who's going to be forced to take them, how are we going to make sure they're safe, etc. And so, so the thing about it is, one of the things that's unfortunate is that, at least in the United States, we have seen where our healthcare system has not actually worked in a way that's equal and just for everyone. So because of that, there's been a lot of mistrust about medical treatments, vaccines, etc. We now have an issue with Moderna where you don't have enough minorities signing up to actually, check out to actually be part of the coronavirus trials. So because of that, then we don't know, is it safe in us or is it safe only in people who are not African-American? So anyhow, again, I think that a lot of these questions, I think that people don't really understand the degree of science that actually goes in once something is finally approved, okay? So if I'm Pfizer and I create a vaccine, right, I then have to show my data to a panel of other physicians. And they literally rip my study apart. This was not good, this was not good, this is not good, right? And until it passes the mustard, what we call peer reviewed, until it's peer reviewed, then it is not published in a magazine. So then when it's published, then everyone else can actually see, here's what they did, here's the limitations of the study. There's a broad review process that goes on that has nothing to do with the FDA or the CDC. Okay, the FDA or the CDC could approve a vaccine tomorrow, and if I haven't seen the journal article, a peer-reviewed journal article on it, I am not administering it to my patients, right? So you know, there is a perception that things are really being manipulated. And I think it's important that people realize that the science community has a way of actually really regulating things. And that doesn't mean we're 100% correct all the time. When you actually get into things like who's making decisions about someone living or dying, you get into that in a lot of different ways. If people don't get the vaccine, there are going to be problems with people dying who are not vaccinated. So I haven't read the article completely, but I just want to share some of those thoughts about this topic that I've actually seen around a lot. Okay, is there one type of flu vaccine? And can you reiterate about the importance of why to get the flu vaccine now? Okay, yes. So yeah, I think there's two types of flu vaccines. I've seen two. I'm assuming, I don't know if both of them are out this year, but normally there's two. So what's important is that the people who actually really got in trouble last year are people who caught the flu and caught COVID-19, or caught another virus called respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, and also caught COVID-19 at the same time. So that's why it's really important to get the flu vaccine. The other thing is when you get the flu vaccine, it takes 2 weeks for it to become effective. So if you take the vaccine now, it is not going to be effective until maybe like the 7th or so of October, right? So you don't want to wait and get the vaccine, you know, when flu season is already here, because it actually takes 2 weeks to actually become effective. So that is why it's so important. So I got my flu vaccine. About 2 weeks ago. I really recommend anybody, you go to CVS, I don't even think they asked me for my insurance card. They just gave me the flu vaccine. So they're making it very easy for you to get this year. Okay, let's see. Okay, so someone's asking me, coronavirus or COVID-19, what is the difference? Okay, so coronavirus is a class of coronaviruses, of which COVID-19 is one of them. So people sometimes use it, you know, right now you'll hear people use coronavirus when they're really referring to COVID-19. Okay, so COVID-19 stands for CO, stands for corona, VI stands for virus, D stands for D, and 19 is because it was first noticed in 2019. So that's how COVID-19 got its name. So, but it is a coronavirus, but there's thousands of coronavirus. COVID-19 is one of them. So, but people will use that word interchangeably and say coronavirus or COVID-19. And then what can we live with and have minimal side effects? I'm not sure what you're asking, what we can live with. You mean what sort of, I'm not sure exactly if you want to type in a little bit more about what you're asking. I'm not sure if you're asking about minimal side effects from a vaccine or minimal side effects from getting the disease. So if you want to give me a little bit more of an explanation there. All righty. While we're waiting for that, anybody else can put their information in the Q&A or chat. All right, do we have any more in the Q&A or chat? Hold on just a second, let me just check. Okay, all righty. Here, the side effects from virus or COVID, which one has, oh, okay, the side effect from the virus or COVID-19, which has the minimum side effects. Okay, so if you get an infection with COVID-19, the way to minimize, I think that's what you're asking me. If you actually get COVID-19, the way to minimize the infection or to minimize the side effects associated with the infection is the vitamin D3, the zinc, Also, when you actually get the disease using steroids, dexamethasone for treatment, if you have to go into the hospital. Also, waiting as long as possible before putting someone on a ventilator, so that decreases the amount of time on the ventilator. And also plasma therapy. So those are the things that, and also remdesivir decreases the amount of time that people spend in the ICU by just a day or two. So those are the things that actually, the main thing that causes the side effects, the long-term side effects with COVID-19, is actually being on the ventilator. It's very stressful, and there's a lot of side effects to being on a ventilator and in the ICU for long periods of time. So that is the thing that really causes that trauma to your lungs, is the thing that really causes a lot of problems, as well as the renal problems and amputations, as far as, you know, your body getting oxygenated thoroughly. All of that is associated with being in the ICU and being ventilated. Okay, is it true that most pharmaceutical companies cannot be sued in court for damages believed caused by their products? Actually, that's actually not true. You will find that there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and the ones that are coming off my mind, the first ones are, there's all sorts of lawsuits now about certain meshes, right? And these were people who had abdominal hernias, and the meshes became a problem. There was also a product that was used for folks with pulmonary embolisms, and it was a umbrella or screen that was put in. Most of them were good, but there was one manufacturer where it didn't have a good lifespan to it. And no, there's been huge lawsuits. And the biggest one has been the opioids. I mean, the opioid manufacturers filed bankruptcy, and they're gone. So no, it is not true that pharmaceutical companies cannot be sued in court for damages related to their products. Now, that being said, there are some products where they decide. So, for instance, the inventor of the polio vaccine, the scientist gave the patent to the pharmaceutical company for free, and they have actually always delivered that particular vaccine at cost with no profit. When they cut that agreement with the United States government and with other countries, they included with it no liability protection, right? Because they had gotten the patent for free, and then they agreed to distribute it at no upcharge. So, but no, pharmaceutical companies can absolutely be sued in court for damages related to their products, and have been. All righty. In fact, I will add a couple stories related to that to the next presentation. All right, anything else? Any other questions? All right, if that is everything. Oh, I got one more in under the wire. Here you go. All righty, let's see. Oh, very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna add some liability questions. So there's a question about, can a bar or restaurant be sued? So it's very interesting. So there's been a lot of, so Trump gave very blanket liability protection to employers. And so it's very interesting. So like the meat packing places, the restaurants, the bars, they have very broad liability during this time period. And I think too broad of a liability, because then it leads to them actually being not quite as responsible as they should be. But yeah, so no, they have been given, so when they do these emergency orders, and I'm going to actually add some slides on this. What happens when they do an emergency orders? So when they do emergency orders, they'll often put some liability protection in. And they also put some things in that allow us as physicians, like for instance, if I have a Virginia license, I normally can't practice in New York. So they'll put something in where I can go practice anywhere in the country because they want to be able to use a larger pool of physicians. So yeah, no, so what I'll do is I will research some of the liability protections that were put in. I think they're too broad, and I think they led to some irresponsible behavior. Even the casinos are not necessarily telling employees when employees are actually becoming positive. I know some of the teachers unions are actually fighting this. And I will add some of the liability protection information to the next slide, to the next presentation on Thursday, and we can discuss what happens when an emergency order goes into place, because I think that is important. So, so yeah, there's broad liability protection right now for hospitals, doctors, restaurants, bars, employers, meat packing places, etc. So, but not pharmaceutical companies. So. All righty. Sounds good. Did we get everything? All righty. I want to thank you all for coming, and make sure to invite anyone you'd like and share this invitation with anyone you'd like. And I'll see you back again on Thursday. Thank you very much.